If you're listening now, you don't need to imagine anything, just listen. Because there are roads that don't ask to be seen. They only exist when the world is silent. That night, the sky was too clear to attract attention. There was no strong wind, no rain in sight, nor the kind of darkness that frightens. It was an ordinary night, one of those that repeat themselves so many times throughout life that they end up fading into memory. Yet there was something different, not in the air, not in the sound, but in the slow, subtle feeling that time had decided to move more slowly. The road stretched out ahead, as always. Old asphalt, worn edges, no recent paint indicating boundaries or directions. A simple road, connecting small places to even smaller ones. During the day, it was just that, a forgotten path, used by few, ignored by almost everyone. But at night, it seemed to remember something that no one else remembered. The streetlights weren't new. Some were flickering, others had been out for years. Still, a soft light appeared from time to time, as if the night itself had learned to illuminate just enough not to frighten. There was no hurry there, no cars, no distant horns, just the low sound of silence itself. That silence that doesn't disturb, it simply envelops. Perhaps you know this kind of place. A road you've traveled many times, but never truly observed. Because certain paths don't reveal themselves when we're too attentive. They prefer when we're tired. When the mind has already released the day's defenses. When thoughts begin to dissolve, one by one, the moon emerged from thin clouds, reflecting softly on the asphalt. It wasn't a bright light. It was more of an ancient glow, like the reflection of something that was once important. The road continued almost straight ahead, but there were gentle curves that disappeared into the darkness, inviting without promising anything. There were no signs indicating what came next. There never had been. And, interestingly, that was always enough. At some point in life, we learn to appreciate paths that don't explain everything. Paths that don't require quick decisions. Paths that simply continue and continue, as if they knew that no one is really in a hurry to arrive. There were trees all around, but not too dense. They respected the road, keeping their distance. Their branches didn't reach out, didn't block the passage, they just watched, motionless, like ancient witnesses of nights similar to this one. Some leaves moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, producing a soft sound, not a whisper, but something close to it. A sound that could easily be mistaken for a memory. The air was cool. Not cold, just cool enough to remind you that the day was over. The ideal temperature for aimless walks, for lingering a few extra minutes outside, for not wanting to rush back. It was the kind of night that doesn't ask for explanations, just presence. And then, almost without warning, that feeling arose. Not fear, not surprise, but a slight, quiet strangeness, like when we recognize a face without remembering where from. The road seemed longer, not physically but in time, as if the stretch ahead had silently extended while no one paid attention. There was no abrupt change, no new curve, no strange sound, yet something there didn't seem to belong entirely to that particular night, as if the road had chosen that moment to exist in another way. Not different, just more present. Perhaps it was just tiredness, or perhaps it was one of those nights when the mind starts mixing memories with the present. After all, how many times have we traveled paths like this throughout our lives? How many similar roads have been stored somewhere in our memory, waiting for the right moment to reappear? The curious thing is that, during the day, nobody ever commented on that road. There were never any stories. There were never any warnings. No conversations were ever interrupted when the subject came up. It was as if, under the sunlight, it was completely ordinary, invisible even. But at night she seemed to be asking for silence. And at that specific moment, without clocks, without haste, without witnesses, the road was there, tranquil, stable, ancient, as if it had always existed. As if only now someone was truly willing to perceive it. There was no need to go on, nor to return. Just being there seemed enough. As if the simple act of observing was, in itself, a form of participation. The road didn't call, it didn't threaten, it didn't promise, it simply continued, gently into the night, and maybe, just maybe, she was waiting for someone who wasn't in a hurry to understand. It wasn't immediately noticeable. The road continued on, silent, seemingly the same as so many others. The asphalt remained firm beneath our feet, without new cracks, without marks that would betray anything out of the ordinary. Yet, after a few moments of observation, a feeling arose that was difficult to name, like when we realized that a clock has stopped, not because of the sound, but because of its absence. The first detail was too simple to cause alarm. The sound, or rather the lack of it. There were no insects, no distant corners, no noise coming from the trees. It wasn't absolute silence, but an organized silence, as if each sound had decided to remain in the exact place where it had always been. The road seemed to respect that. As the gaze moved forward, something began to reveal itself slowly, almost politely. The soft lighting that had previously appeared occasionally now seemed more spaced out, not extinguished, just distant. As if the points of light were moving away from each other without anyone having moved anything. There were no signs, none indicating speed limits, none warning of curves, none saying where that road lead. That, in itself, wasn't strange. Many old roads were like that. What was curious was the feeling that those signs had never existed there. They hadn't been removed. They were never needed. The air remained the same, fresh, stable, but now it carried a faint scent of damp earth, even without recent rain. A subtle, almost comforting aroma, reminiscent of nights spent in distant places, difficult to pinpoint in memory. Perhaps childhood, perhaps old travels, perhaps something that didn't need to be clearly remembered. That's when the most subtle detail of all emerged. At the edge of the road, where before there had only been low, dark vegetation, there seemed to be space. Not empty space, but available space. As if something could be there and simply wasn't at that moment. The grass was too short. The ground, excessively level. No recent markings, no visible construction. Just the impression that this stretch had been prepared for something that never arrived. Or that he had already left. The road continued straight for a few more meters, but now there was a slight sense of repetition. The gentle curves seemed too familiar, not identical, just similar enough to cause doubt. As if the road were reusing forms seen before, with slight variations, like someone telling the same story, changing only a few details. There was no fear in it, just quiet curiosity. At some point, it seemed as if time wasn't moving in the same way. It didn't stop, but it didn't rush either. It was as if each step had the same weight, the same duration, none shorter, none longer. The kind of regularity we rarely notice until it becomes too obvious to ignore. Perhaps it was just the night, perhaps it was just tiredness, or perhaps that road had an old custom, that of only revealing itself when no one was in a hurry to arrive. The sky remained the same, but the stars seemed more fixed. None twinkled, none hid behind clouds. They simply remained, observing not consciously, but like things that have existed for too long to move on a whim. And then, almost without realizing it, the feeling of being at a limit arose. Not a physical boundary. The road didn't end. There was no barrier, no abrupt change in terrain. Yet something indicated that this specific stretch wasn't crossed frequently, as if few people reached that point, not because it was forbidden, but because of distraction, as if normally something caught their attention beforehand, but that night, nothing called. The road was clear, and perhaps that was the most curious thing of all. There was no explicit invitation, no sign asking to continue, no warning asking to stop. Just the calm continuity of a path that seemed to exist outside the common habit of nights, as if it were there for whoever, for some reason, stayed awake long enough to notice. And at that precise moment, the silent question arose, not formulated in words, only felt. This road has always been here, Or does it only appear when the night gets too quiet? The answer didn't come, and the road, patiently, continued on. The road continued effortlessly, as if it demanded no decision. Each step seemed the same as the last, not through repetition, but through consistency. There were no surprises on the ground, no irregularities that required attention, yet something invited one to continue observing not the path itself, but the sensation of walking within it. As time passed, a time difficult to measure, it became clear that the road wasn't revealed by abrupt changes, but by small details that only emerged when viewed without haste. The edges of the asphalt, for example, weren't perfectly straight. They had almost imperceptible curves, as if they had been shaped by hand, following old decisions made when the road was still being imagined. In some places, the ground seemed darker, as if touched by shadows older than the night itself. They weren't stains, they weren't marks, just subtle differences in tone, like pages of a book that have aged unevenly. Nothing there seemed recent. Everything carried the tranquility of someone who has seen many similar nights before. Gradually, memories emerged that didn't seem entirely personal. The memory of long journeys taken without a defined destination, of nights when the radio was too quiet to be understood, of conversations interrupted by tiredness, not by the end of the topic, simple sensations, without defined faces, without dates, without the need for explanation. The road seemed to accept these memories without question, as if it were a place where weary thoughts could rest for a few moments, without needing to organize themselves. There was no judgment there, only space. As I walked, something new emerged, or perhaps it had always been there, but only now could I perceive it. Small marks beside the road, not footprints, not tracks, just slight irregularities in the terrain, as if someone had stopped there many times. Not recently, and not all at once, but over the years. Invisible resting points. It was easy to imagine someone standing there, observing the night, without a watch, without any commitments. Someone who didn't need to get anywhere. The road didn't tell this story directly. It simply left enough space for the imagination to fill in the rest slowly, without urgency. The sky remained still, but its sense of depth intensified. The stars seemed more distant now, not because they had moved, but because my attention no longer needed them. The road had become sufficient. The rhythm of my steps, almost automatic, created a gentle cadence, like a long, tranquil breath. There was also the strange feeling that this path remembered those who passed by, not consciously, but in the way old places often do, by the way they remained the same, despite everything. As if each of my steps fit perfectly into a space that was already expected, no houses appeared, no clear forks in the road, no indication of change. Yet the environment seemed slightly different at each stretch, not in what it showed, but in what it suggested. Sometimes, the road seemed to lead to something that had already happened. Other times, to something that never came to pass, but could have. The most curious thing was the absence of necessity. There was no desire to speed up, nor to stop. Just continuing seemed natural. It felt as if this path had been made for this specific state of mind, when the body is awake, but the thoughts are already beginning to drift away from the day. At times, a feeling of returning would wash over me, as if certain stretches had already been traveled before, perhaps on another night, perhaps at another time. There was no certainty, only a deep sense of familiarity. The road neither confirmed nor denied. It simply accepted, and then, without warning, came the realization that this exploration wasn't about discovering something new. It was about remaining, about allowing the mystery not to reveal itself immediately, about walking without turning everything into an answer. The road seemed comfortable with that. It was a silent partner in this quiet journey, holding space not just for my steps, but for the silent questions that didn't need a reply. In the stillness of the night, on this ancient path, the greatest discovery was the peace of simply being, of moving forward without a destination, guided only by the rhythm of my own breathing. Thank you for joining me on this walk. I hope you found a moment of peace here too. She didn't offer private lessons because she didn't need to. Her role wasn't to lead to a destination, but to support the journey, to be the place where questions could exist without weight, where silence wasn't emptiness, but rest. And so, step by step, the night continued, serene, unchanged, as if that path were there only to be experienced by those willing to follow it without wanting to arrive. At some point, it's impossible to say exactly when the road began to become less present. It didn't disappear, it didn't transform, it simply stopped demanding attention, like something that continues to exist even when we close our eyes. The silence remained the same, stable, welcoming. No new sound arose, no old one returned. The night demanded no further observation. It seemed content with the time that had already been shared. The road continued ahead, as always, but now there was a sense of gentle conclusion, not an end, just a rest, as if that particular stretch had been traveled enough for that night. Nothing indicated that it wouldn't continue to exist afterward. It just didn't need to be followed anymore. Perhaps, when the day came, everything would seem ordinary again. The worn asphalt, the uneven edges, the forgotten path between small places. Perhaps someone would pass by without noticing anything beyond what had always been visible. And that would be perfectly fine, because certain things are not meant to be remembered clearly. They exist to be felt, and then left in peace. The road offered no answers because it was never meant for questions. Its mystery wasn't a problem to be solved, but a space to be inhabited for a few moments. A silent interval between what was the day and what will be the next dawn. And if someone returned there, another night perhaps more tired, perhaps more attentive, the road might or might not appear the same way. There was no guarantee, no promise, only the quiet possibility that some paths choose when they reveal themselves. Perhaps she'll always be there, or perhaps it only emerges when the world becomes quiet enough. The moon remained high, indifferent to conclusions. The stars remained motionless. Nothing needed to change. The night knew how to bring things to a close without completely sealing them off. And so, without warning, without a marker, without explanation, the sensation of walking began to dissolve, like a thought that drifts away as sleep approaches. The road remained but no longer demanded company. She was at peace, and that was enough. Breathe slowly. There is nothing that needs to be understood right now. Some paths exist only to be traversed, and others just to teach us how to rest.